Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining. So, good afternoon or good evening, depending on what part of the world you're in. Thank you for joining us for the launch of the new Adoption Dialogue podcast. This is a show that's all about adoption and everything related to the short and permanent care of children, including fostering. So, my name is Arata Bafo. I'm an adoptee, and I want to welcome you all to the launch of Adoption Dialogue. It really is my pleasure to be launching this podcast this evening. Whilst there are many podcasts about adoption, Adoption Dialogue's goal is quite unique in that it's to create an informative, honest perspective that speaks to the many layers of adoption from those who have gone through it. I know there are some topics people don't really want to discuss, but those are the very topics that require our attention and the most, and which is what Adoption Dialogue aims to achieve this through your hosts, Sally Baffle and Judith Alexis Craig. Discussing all things adoption from a perspective of the adoptive parent, Auntie Sally, and an adoptive person, Judith. There's an African proverb that says, if you have a heart to give a child a home, you shouldn't let fear stand in the way. Without further ado, let me introduce the host of Adoption Dialogue, starting with Miss Sally Baffle, who in adoption to being my mother, runs Thank You Charity and wears many other titles, one of which is an adoption consultant, to guide people through their adoption journeys, and Judith Alexis Craig, who, like myself, is an adopted person as well as a therapist, facilitator, and together they will lead you on this journey that will challenge you to open your understanding to the human experiences that only serve to make the world a better place for everybody. So, Auntie Sally, you're first to introduce yourself. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Arata. My name is Sally Bafo, and I first of all want to welcome everybody who's here. I know there are a lot of people who have responded to our call to come and join us in launching this. Thank you very much for coming. My name is Sally Bafo, as Arata has mentioned earlier on. I started off, as I mentioned earlier on, as an interior architect and switched to become an adoptive parent. But I think the reason why we're doing this show, I think that's what's more important, is that even as an adoptive parent, it's a very challenging experience. It's very joyful, it's challenging, but you're going to find that if you're able to stick with it, it will probably be one of the most rewarding experiences that you've ever had. I also want to be here to be able to encourage people not only to adopt, but also to help them to understand that we're going to work this journey together. We'll support people through it. There are lots of things that are happening in this world of adoption that many of us need to understand in order the public and the parents and the people involved in it to have a better relationship with each other and a better understanding of each other. And we're hoping that this Adoption Dialogue show will enable us to discuss all those issues, uncomfortable as they are, so that we all have a better understanding of how to approach each other and how to relate better to each other and how to make the world a much better place for people who have been through this journey, people who are in the care system, people who've been fostered, people who've been adopted. So that's really why we're doing this show from my perspective as an adoptive mother. So I'll hand over to Judith and she will also tell us why she's very committed to this project.
Thank you so much, Auntie Sally and Arata, and welcome everybody as well. Thank you so much for being with us this afternoon, this evening. I am based in Canada, and so for me, it is the middle of the afternoon. So it's a pleasure to be here with you. And, you know, really, as Auntie Sally and Arata have both alluded to, adoption is very layered. It is very complex, and it is exactly those complexities that need to be discussed, that need to be highlighted. We cannot shield them or hide from them. We have to address them head on. And many people think, oh, adoption is just a joyous experience. Unfortunately, that is not always the case. That is not everybody's experience or journey. And even those who have what we consider good adoptions, you know, need to still have a lot of layers that we can explore in great detail. With adoption comes great loss, and that's at the core of adoption, is in order to adopt, there's been a great loss of the adopted person initially. With that loss, then there become other gains. With grief becomes joy, deep trauma. These are all the many complexities that we aim to discuss and aim to bring to you throughout this journey together that we are on. It's so important that adopted people have their voices amplified in this journey, because truly we are at the center of it and our voices need to be heard. Our hope is that we can learn from those who've been adopted, and we will do better in the future. So I want to pass it back to Rada and just say thank you again for being with us.
Thank you, Judith, and thank you, Auntie Sally, Mummy. So just a quick thing, if anybody has any questions, please put them into the chat and they will be answered at the end. Or you could alternatively, if you're familiar with Zoom, you could raise your hand at the top, there's the row at the top where you can raise your hand, and those people will be called on at the end as well. So it's totally up to you with how you feel comfortable doing that. Now declare Adoption Dialogue podcast launched. Thank you again for joining.
Thank you.
This is the show that shines a light on the joys, the challenges, and the complexities of the lifelong adoption journey. Of all of the members within the galaxy, that includes the adopted person, the birth or original family, and adoptive families. Myself, Judith, and Auntie Sally will be joining you today to share our perspectives, both personally and professionally, as an adopted person, such as myself, and Auntie Sally, who's an adoptive mother. Each month, we hope you will join us as we feature different elements of the adoption journey, and we will often have guests joining us along the way. So thank you for joining us as we begin the Adoption Dialogue.
And my name, as Judith has just said, is Sally Bafor. I'm Auntie Sally, and you'll all be wondering why I'm being called Auntie Sally. It's because there's a generational thing. I'm an older generation to Judith. And when I met Judith, I adopted her as my niece. So I am her auntie. And so she always calls me Auntie Sally, as does all the kids, her young people her age. So I'm speaking from London. Judith is in Canada. And we're presenting this show across the waters. We both met through adoption. And as Judith has explained very eloquently, this is a journey that many people are going through. And we want to present this program to share the experience of adoption from the different angles of it, because there's so many different facets to it. And we'd also welcome people to tell us, and we'll bring guests in to share with us their experiences so we can have a better understanding of the human element of adoption.
We think we should let you get to know us a little bit more. So I'd like to share a little bit about myself and ask then Auntie Sally to do the same. So as you all know, I am an adopted person, but that's not all that defines me. I am also a daughter, a sibling, an auntie, a niece, a granddaughter, and a partner, and a mama in many forms. Professionally, I'm a registered social worker, consultant, facilitator, trainer, speaker, writer, and now host. And I am joining you, as Auntie Sally said, from Ontario, Canada today. And it's an absolute pleasure to be here and to share and learn together more about adoption and the journey and the impact that it has on all of those involved. So Auntie Sally, over to you if you could just share a little bit with folks so they can learn a little bit more about yourself and our story, of course, of how we met.
Yeah, that's right. That's the other one. Well, I'm from Ghana originally. I'm based in London. I have been for 40 years and more. Started off as an interior architect. After that, became an adoptive parent. And once I became an adoptive parent, that's another story to be told. I decided to become a full-time parent and look for a job that enabled me to work from home so I could parent my children much more effectively. I recognized that they needed that kind of parenting. And as a result of that, I became a consultant for adoption, sitting on adoption panels and making decisions about people, children in the care system, and people who were able to adopt and doing training programs for them as well and supporting the adopters. I finally set up a charity called Thank You Charity, which I continue to run. And in between that, I'm hosting this program and host several other programs as well. So having given you this background, I let Judith tell you where she speaks. I'd like Judith to tell a bit more about her story, and then I'll tell you how I became an adoptive parent.
So my journey did begin, as Auntie Sally said, in Haiti, which for those who may not be familiar with it, it is in the Caribbean, and it shares a landmass called Hispaniola, is a whole landmass. And the other side of the island is actually the country of Dominican Republic. So Haiti and Dominican Republic share the landmass of Hispaniola. And Haiti, of course, speaks French and Creole French are the two official languages of Haiti. And I was born there in 1979. And my journey started actually where some may think, well, quite traumatically, actually. I don't know all of the details of my early beginnings. What the story that I grew up knowing and being told was that I was actually found on the side of the road. I was found by some passerbyers. I don't know their names. I don't know who they are, but they found me there in a little ditch. I was actually covered with bugs and I was naked, no identification whatsoever, no little blanket, nothing on me. And from there, they saw me and they took me to the nearby hospital. This was in the north of the capital city, in a city called Cap-Haïtien, which is the second largest city in Haiti. And from there, these folks took me to the hospital. I was received there by the nurses and they took care of me. They, examined me, they assessed my situation, and they estimated that I was about 3 days old, approximately. They would have had to take into account my umbilical cord, the size I was, etc., to know this. And during the examination, they actually found that I was in very good condition for a child who was just found on the roadside. I was relatively healthy. I was, of course, I'm sure I was very hungry, but I was healthy and I didn't show signs of extreme malnutrition or anything of that nature. So from there, I stayed at that hospital for about 2 weeks. And a nun who often traveled to work in Haiti and work in Canada and facilitate adoptions between Canada and Haiti passed through the hospital as she often did on her journeys and travels. And the nuns at this time said, the nuns who were working at the hospital, the nurses there, said, no one has come to claim this little baby girl. She's been here for a few weeks. Nobody has come for her. We have no identification for her. So we want to entrust this child to you to take down to the capital city of Port-au-Prince and take her to one of the orphanages there, where she can get further care and decisions can be made about her future. So this nun did that. She took me with her. We traveled to Port-au-Prince, which would have been probably about a 7 or 8 hour journey, taking either a tap-tap or a car. And it's a long journey indeed. And we made it to the orphanage in Port-au-Prince. And I lived there for a further 3 months. Now, during that time, little did I know, going on in Canada, it was actually Montreal, Canada, my adoptive family were living there. And my father was a minister, and he and my mother really felt a calling from their religious background to, take care of orphans essentially, and to do that piece of work. They already had a biological daughter who was almost 3 years old at the time, but they really did want to expand their family through adoption. They settled on Haiti, not having ever been there themselves, but learning a little bit about the country, they decided to adopt from Haiti. Now, this did cause some challenges within, particularly my maternal grandparents, not being as open to the idea of my parents adopting a Black child. This, again, was at the sort of late 70s, heading into the early 80s. But my mother persevered and she said, no, this is what we feel we are meant to do. And they went through the process. And they were introduced to myself. The nun who had my power of attorney and who would take me to the orphanage said, oh, there's a little baby girl. But unfortunately, by this time, I had actually become very sick. I was actually near death due to the formula that they were giving me. At the time, they didn't realize that I was actually allergic to the formula milk that I was being fed. So my family said, no, we still want her. We still want her to join our family. And so I traveled, I got a little bit better. I was able to travel. And in January of 1980, I was bundled onto a plane with several other Haitian children. And we were flown to Montreal, Canada, where we arrived on a very, very cold January day. Some negative, I believe it was in the -30 region. So it was very cold. So on the plane, I started my journey in a very cute little pink dress. I ended up in a very pink, puffy snowsuit so that I would be protected from the weather elements. So that was truly a culture shock that I experienced as a little baby so drastically. From the warmth and a sea of Black faces to hearing Creole and French spoken and being whisked on this plane ride and then landing and seeing really a sea of white faces and hearing French still, but my parents are actually Anglophone. So they spoke some French, but it was very different and very, I call jarring to my system. It would have been everything about my life in that moment changed. The smells, the sounds, the sights, everything that I was seeing around me would have dramatically changed and altered for me. So much so that when I did hear French, my mother said my eyes would perk up actually and get very bright and big because it was something that was comforting and familiar to me. So we settled into our life, and my mother got used to parenting 2 children. She was actually able to breastfeed me for a short period of time and give me some more of the nutrients that I needed. And I bounced back and I became healthier again. And she really juggled having a 3-year-old toddler and this newborn baby. And life carried on until we moved to America. My father got a new position there, and they went on to have another biological child, my younger sister. And then they decided we moved back to Canada after a couple of years and settled in Toronto. And they decided to adopt again. And they returned to Haiti because they thought that would be important for me to have somebody from my country of birth as well. And this time they adopted a little toddler. He was 4 years old, my younger brother, when he joined our family. And then they went on to have another biological child. So I grew up in a family with 5 of us. And it was a mixed bag of 2 of us being adopted, 3 of the children not being adopted, and sort of what that meant for us as we traveled through life, just generally walking down the street. We were very identifiable as a family. And of course, that led to many, many questions that as a young child, I felt I always had to answer all of these people. And in some ways, some very intrusive, ignorant questions at times. And other times, just curious questions of people wondering, wow, how does this family work? And actually questioning, do you belong in this family and how do you fit in? So as a young child, I really started questioning myself and where I did fit in. And I went through truly a real experience of culture shock, racial identity challenges from the age of 2, I would say, really is when it started. So life started off in some very challenging ways, and I've had to learn over the course of now 40 plus years how to navigate those challenges, how to learn to heal and love myself fully, and to be in a place of also forgiveness, not understanding why I was thrown into a ditch at my early stages. And those are some of the things that we'll be sharing with you in the adoption dialogue, talking about truly all elements. There are some that are very painful and hard to talk about at times, but it's important that people have a real some understanding of what this journey is like. And while we don't represent and we don't claim to represent all adopted people or all adoptive parents, we're coming to you with our perspectives, our journeys, and our lens. So we hope that you will enjoy and join us on this journey, and we really look forward to sharing it with you.
Thank you, Judith, for sharing that. I remember, and I must tell you how I met Judith, because you've heard her story. She's from Haiti to Canada. I came from Ghana to England. The two don't meet. Now, I'm talking about the year, it would have been 2007, was it, Judith, wasn't it? 2007.
Yes.
Yeah, 2007. And that was the year of Ghana's 50th anniversary of independence. I had been listed as one of the 50 outstanding people who were creating value here in London. And a gentleman called Andrew Tagobor was the one who had been charged to meet up with all the 50 people who had been listed, who had actually been nominated by the Ghanaian community here in England, to interview them. Tags didn't know where to find me. This was before the days of LinkedIn and Facebook and social media that enables you to locate people very easily. So I had gone to a conference that was being organized by the Ghana High Commission. And I really didn't think very much of that conference. I remember very well and thinking, oh dear, I really should be back because I have got things to do at home. And I was with a young lady, Cynthia, I remember. And she brought me a newspaper. And I thought, oh, can I have a copy of that? She said, oh, but that's my copy. So she was going to get me a copy. The person she went to get the copy from was no less than our dear Andrew Tagore. So when she mentioned that she needed it desperately for somebody called, and Andrew said, for who is this Sally? He said, oh, Sally Baffle? Yeah, absolutely. He said, oh, I've been searching for her and I need to interview her. So Andrew came and met me, and we met up later on to do the interview. It was a very extensive interview. And Andrew and I got on very, very well. And when he heard my story, he said to me, you know, Sally, you really must meet my girlfriend's best friend. And I said, what about her? He said, you know, she's also adopted. And I thought, well, that would be interesting. I'd really like to meet her. So Andrew went off. Obviously, I said, give her my telephone number. Would you believe that? I think it was the same day, the very next day, Judith called me straight away. And we spoke for 3 hours on the telephone, with Judith telling me this story that she's just shared with you. It was a shock to my system. I kind of had an idea of foundlings, but I'd never met one. I heard that Anita Baker was a foundling. I heard her story, but to meet one, and here I was listening to the story of Judith. And I do remember when Judith told me her story, when she said that she was found in a ditch covered in ants. I said, Judith, do you realize that if you were covered in ants, they should have been eating you up as they do? If you were covered in ants and you were alive, but more than that, you were healthy and thriving when you were checked in the hospital, it means that those ants were mothering you. They were taking care of you and they were feeding you like a queen bee. You know, these are the moments when you have to stop and say there's such a thing as providence. God really does take care of his children. And so Judith was found, and here I am, we'd met. And Judith was living outside London at the time. She's living in Buckinghamshire, wasn't she? Yeah. So then she decided to come down to London, and she became a trustee for our charity. And we did some amazing projects together, really incredible projects together. And we've been very close since then. And, I haven't heard Judith's story. And of course, Judith came from a white family, effectively, and didn't have very much of a sense of herself as a Black person. And I'm a Black mother. My children had been transracially fostered before they came to me. So I was very much aware in the early stages of the sort of challenges that my children had in the beginning. So I knew that my children were there for 2 years and they came to me. So we helped them to orientate themselves, to see themselves, identify themselves more as Black people and be comfortable in their skin as Black African Caribbean children. And Judith had grown up never having had the opportunity for that side of her life to develop. And so I decided that, look, this is a child who continues to need parenting. I'm going to be her auntie. And I told her, that's it, I'm claiming you. So I claimed Judith myself. I claimed her, and she was going to be, and we've been together ever since. So here we are. And then, of course, along the line, Judith got married, had 2 children, and went back to Canada. But we maintained contact and decided that this is a program we must do. Her story needs to be told, and I have a story to tell as well. But more importantly, I think the focus should not only be on adopted parents as well, but more on the adopted children, because I think, and if you go on the internet, you have a look at the internet and you read up stories about adopted children, there's a lot of pain that comes through and a lot of healing is needed. So we're hoping that through this program, we can extend some healing to some people. People can identify with our stories. And as Judith pointed out, absolutely, this is our story. We're not representing anybody out there, it's ours. And if anybody can identify with it and it helps them, that is a blessing. And we're pleased about that. Yeah.
Very much so. Thank you, Auntie Sally. And I'm happy and honored to be claimed by you. And I consider your children my dear cousins. And it has been such a blessing to have somebody, I moved away from Canada. I lived in the UK for 12 years and I didn't move there with any family. I moved there on my own. So when you move to another country, you really have to create a family, a community, a network of people. So I was very blessed and fortunate to come into contact with Tugs, aka Yao Tugabo, and his wife, now wife Sonia, and their families, and Auntie Sally and her family, and many other people, including our Haitian community. There's actually a very strong Haitian community in the UK, which I was really honored as well to be a part of. Also, the UK is very dear to me because it also connected me actually to the adoption community. I'd had very little contact to that prior to my move there. And so being able to connect to all of these communities that were so necessary and so much a part of me that truly had been underdeveloped essentially was an incredible time of self-awareness and awakening for me. That was something that my journey there and my experiences there have definitely shaped me on my journey. And when we talk about mothering and sort of our experiences of being mothered, I actually want to ask you, Auntie Sally, because of course we all come from parents. And can you share with us, because I think it's very significant, your experience of actually being mothered by your own mother and sort of the influence that she had on your life. And you mentioned it briefly, the influence she had on you becoming a mother, and in your case, becoming a mother through adoption. So can you share with us a little bit more about sort of that, your early beginnings, and sort of how it led into your adoption journey?
You know, I was very fortunate. I had an amazing mother. My mother was so incredible that even in death, she continues to be incredible. I know it sounds a very strange thing. I remember there was an occasion, and I do have to digress because I've made a statement that I need to justify. When I say in death, she continues to be incredible. I sent my daughter to university in America, and we needed to get a lot of things in place. Nothing was working. Everything, we had roadblocks at every stage. And then on one particular day, everything fell into place. The bank opened, the account opened, everything literally. And I was wondering, what is happening today? That happened to be the 8th anniversary of my mother's death. And on the same day, which was so incredible, my brother in New York at the time had had a car accident. He'd had a little tipple, unfortunately. It was so terrible that he was on the side of the road. The police came. They couldn't believe that he was actually came out of that mangled car unscathed. And so they wanted to breathalyze him. And I think eventually had to send him to court because he didn't want to be breathalyzed. He'd had a tipple, of course. It turned out that was the day. He'd had a dreadful accident. He came out totally unscathed. The car was a complete write-off. Court sent a date for his hearing, and the hearing turned out to be my mother's birthday.
Wow.
It was the most extraordinary thing. So the accident happened on the anniversary of her death. The court hearing happened on the day of my mother's birthday. And when he went to court, they said his record was so clean. The judge gave him a warning and sent him off and gave him a course to go and do, and told him never to drink again. He never touched alcohol again after that. So that's just one little example of the kind of mother that I had, who even in death continues to parent her children. She was, there are 6 of us. I come from a very large family. My father has 20 children, and one of his wives is my mother, who had the most children, 6 of us. My mother was a very protective mother, and also a tigress. You could not touch, you don't mess with her children at all. She was there for all of us. She provided for us absolutely, and always gave us complete confidence in ourselves. We grew up as very confident. All of us grew up as confident children, and actually very obedient. We're obedient children, and we just looked out for each other as we grew up. All of us looked out for each other. So we're a very close-knit family, and that's what I knew. And we're so close that we depended on each other in a way that I look back now, and even though it might sound like it's unhealthy, it was very comforting. When I came, I was the first one to come to England. I came here on my own. And I went to go and buy a coat. That was the first thing you do when you come to a cold country. And I walked into the shop, and I stood in the shop and started looking at all the coats around me and burst out crying. The shop assistant came to and said, "Oh, don't worry, madam, it may never happen." And I thought, oh my God, you don't know. The reason I started crying was because I suddenly realized that I didn't have any of my siblings to help me to choose the coat that would fit me the most, because we depend on each other so much. I'd wear the coat, and this one would say, "Oh no, sir, I don't like the color. No, the sleeves. Okay, no, this is the color. This is the one that fits you." That's how we grew up. And when I found myself on the day that I didn't have my brothers and sisters with me to validate what are the decisions I was going to make, it broke my heart. I cried so much, and I suddenly realized that I was now an adult and had to make decisions for myself. It was very, very daunting. One moves on. So that's the background of me. And the journey continues. Then, of course, I got married. And soon after I got married, discovered that I wasn't getting pregnant. Went to have a checkup. Somebody said, have a checkup, and discovered that I had fibroids, which meant the fibroids were so extensive that I only have 5% chance of giving birth. So I called my mother. She was in America at the time because, most of us had traveled. So my mother spent her life moving from one child to the other. And that's how she lived her life at the latter part of her years. And I called her up. She was in America, and I said, Mama, this is what they're saying. That the doctors are saying that I'm not going to have any children. She said, have you had a second opinion? I said, yes, I have. She said, well, look, when you were 10 years old, you said you would adopt a child from every part of the world. Well, this is your opportunity. I thought, wow, I don't even remember that. So I told my husband at the time, and we both considered there were certain personal considerations that we went through and decided that, yeah, we'll do it. And, when these things happen, and that's something that I'd like to talk about right now, because even when you have come to the point where you decide that you want to adopt, you still don't know what the first move is. What do you do? We'd made the decision. So what happens? We had no idea about anything. And interestingly enough, on one occasion when we had a barbecue at home, some friends of ours, we usually had for lots of children would come around and enjoy themselves, and friends that we had would come with all their kids. And there's a particular couple that we didn't really know that well, but we knew them. And so they were there with their 3 children. So the mother, Julie, and I were in the kitchen preparing things. And then I asked her, because her children were so well behaved, Julie, your children are so well behaved. Then I asked her a very strange question. And it's a question that I always ask myself, why did I ever ask such a strange question? I said, Julie, were your children an easy birth? Which is why they're so well behaved, I was thinking. And then she paused for a little while, looked at me pensively. Then she said, they are adopted. I said, really? My goodness. And they behave so well. That's interesting, because clearly at the back of my mind, without even knowing I was carrying that kind of stereotype, my stereotype of an adopted child was somebody who would probably be challenging. I didn't even realize that. I wasn't even consciously aware that I had that stereotype of children who were adopted. So I imagine, I don't know what other stereotypes people have of them, but that is what I had. And I got to know Julie very well, got to know her children. It turned out that even though at that time she was living in another part of London, she happened to do her adoption when they were living in my area in Fulham. So she directed me to the local authority that I had to go. She showed me exactly what you do to become adoptive parents, because I told her then that that's interesting, because we've been thinking of doing it, but we didn't know what the first step is. We didn't know what to do. How do you start it? What do you do? So she directed me as to what to do, and I got in touch with my local authority. And as it happened, again, lots of coincidences, the person who was her social worker became our social worker, and she was amazing. And we were originally going to adopt a boy because I really didn't mind. But then I had to have an operation to have the fibroids removed. It was such a terrible operation. This is before this. Well, this is why we're going through our assessment. The operation was so terrible that I nearly didn't make it. And there's a particular soup we have at home called light soup. It's very good for people when they're not well. And I knew while I was in the hospital and wasn't eating anything that light soup is exactly what I needed that would get me back on my feet again. So I called up a friend of mine who cooks his light soup, the closest to my grandmother's perfect light soup. And he said when he heard my voice on the telephone, he thought that was a death wish. He knew that I was going. So he rushed around, got the ingredients, did the light soup, and turned up at the hospital. I only needed to take 1 teaspoon of it, and here I am today. But what was amusing on the day that he came was that as he was walking into the hospital room, I could see a certain distended stomach coming before a certain body came a few minutes afterwards. It was a pregnant woman, his wife. She was so very, very pregnant. It's a very, very long and big pregnancy. I had to smile, even though I was suffering so much in the hospital bed. Anyway, she was pregnant with twins. So when I got better, we went to say thank you to them, went to visit them, and I saw these beautiful set of twin boy and girl, so loving to each other, a 6-month-old baby. And the boy would look at his sister, stroke her little cheeks, and smile at her. I thought, what? At the age of 6 months, doing this to each other? It blew me away. So I know I whispered to the little, I said, little kids, go and bring me twins where you came from, okay? Imagine. So on the way home, I was saying to my husband that, look, I think that we should try to see if we could get twins instead of a boy, and all of that. But the chance of that is just too ridiculous. Anyway, I came back, called my social worker, mentioned it to her, said, oh, well, that'll be a very difficult one, but we'll put you down for 2 children just in case. But you know what? Within a month, he was working with a newspaper. He got a call. One of the local authority was placing an advert in the newspaper for twins. So he called me at work and I said, listen, just tell them that we want those twins. They said, no, we can't do it that way. We've got to advertise the children. It turned out there were 10 families who were interested in these 2 children, but we were the ones who were selected. And it's often said that be careful what you wish for because you might just get it. That's exactly what happened to us. So we ended up with twins, a twin boy and a twin girl. And when I saw their picture, and again, I want to talk about this because a lot of us, when you're going to adopt, there's something that connects you to that child. When I saw the pictures of my twins, the girl looked exactly like my cousin, would have looked her age. And the boy was exact. He also looked very much like a family friend that we'd grown up with. So I felt a connection with them straight away. And that's how we decided to go with them. So I ended up with a boy and girl who I'm happy to say are now 32 and thriving. However, the children came with a lot of complex needs. And that's the reason why I decided that I couldn't continue working with the full-time, full-on job that I had as an interior architect and decided to get another job that I could do from home so I could work, stay at home mother working from home.
Wow, what a journey and an experience you have been on indeed.
Yeah.
And that is truly very amazing. And it is true. What you call to yourself often shall come. So I think that's an important lesson right there. Definitely.
Mm.
Thank you so much for sharing that with us, Auntie Sally. I think that's a really lovely way to sort of talk about mothering and how you came into it and your journey. And I know there's so much more for you to share, and that as we go on in this Adoption Dialogue show, you'll be able to share and bring in elements of the experiences that you had with your children as well. That will be really rewarding for all of us.
That's true. We want to keep it within. Okay. Yes, I've got somebody here, Jennifer, who says that she said, will the fact that a child is not your birth child always influence your parenting? Oh, so that would be a question to me. Well,
Yeah.
why don't you? Why? Well, yeah, because I'm an adopted parent.
Yeah, I can definitely, I think we both have elements we can share, but please go ahead, Auntie, and start, because I think that's a really important question.
I think you should start with yours because you're in a situation that's quite similar, aren't you?
Yes, yes.
Newish.
I was going to say, so I mentioned in sort of my bio when I was explaining that I'm a mother in many forms, and that often is, oh, how does that come about? So for myself, when I was living in the UK as well and got married at the time, my ex-husband had a child. He told me about her very early on, very early days, which was important, of course, because I knew if we would be together, then his child would come and join us in the UK. So I started my actual mothering relationship, I would say, on the phone. I got to know his daughter and talked to her on the phone, and we started to build a relationship. And that was a really important part. I hadn't met her yet, but we built up this relationship so much so that she asked to start calling me mommy. And I was very honored by that and humbled because, as I say, this was a new journey to me. At this point, I hadn't mothered. So that carried on for about a year and a half. And then within that year, I also found myself being pregnant. So in 2010, at the end of 2010, I gave birth to my first biological child. And a year later, she came to join us. His daughter came to join us in our household as well. So I now had 2 children that I was parenting, one a newborn, and my older daughter was 10 years old at the time when she came to join us. So really for that period of time she was about 8.5, I started this mothering journey. Very different, of course, mothering in this way. But I can tell you, although she was not my biological child, I became very protective of her. I moved immediately into a motherhood experience. And people would often say, oh, is it different? Of course it's different because I wasn't there for her first sort of really 8.5 years. So I didn't get to know her in all of her glory and all the things that she'd experienced and lived through. So there were things that I had missed out and lost out on not have being there on her journey. And that was hard in some ways because I'm learning a child at such an older age. So I had to really pivot and learn, how do I engage with her? How do we build this relationship now that I am mothering her and now that she is in my home? And that does have an impact on how you build that relationship. It doesn't mean I loved her any less by any means. It just meant that it was a different start to our relationship. For my biological child, my first biological child, that I carried her within me. So I had these nuanced moments and these layered elements of the journey, some which were very challenging, because like Auntie Sally, I also learned at that time when I was pregnant that I had fibroids. So it was actually a painful pregnancy in a lot of ways. I was very sick throughout the pregnancy, but it was also very magical for me, because at this point, I had no idea where my biological or first mother was. I had no understanding, but I felt very deeply when I was pregnant. So I had these two very different experiences mothering right from the beginning. And then for me, unfortunately, a couple of years later, I thought, okay, I'm ready to have another child now and add to our family again. I actually experienced two losses. I had two miscarriages in 2014, which were very, very painful and very hard. After that, I have what I call my angel or my rainbow baby, who was born in 2015, my youngest biological child. And she came to join our family, and she came out healthy and strong, and I was so pleased. Fast forward now, and here I am living back in Canada. I am with a partner, and he adopted a little boy recently. So in our family now, I'm parenting, again, a child who's not biologically mine. But nonetheless, I've scooped up this little boy and love on him and parent him. And again, it is different because I wasn't there for his first 4 years of his life. But I was able to enter in, and we are still learning and doing this dance called parenthood and motherhood. But I really consider it a privilege to be able to parent children in these various ways and to really have that. So I say I have my 6 babies, and I've had the privilege of parenting 4 of them. So yes, there are differences. Yes, there are challenges in every element of parenting. Trust me, that is something that people need to be very aware of, but the love that I have for my children truly is the same across the board. It varies, it differs in my experiences, but I am able to love my children. It has influenced my parenting for sure, because I've had to learn and navigate. You have to parent children who are adopted in a slightly different manner. And I don't mean you're treating them differently in a horrible way. I mean, you have to be aware that they come to you with a history. And it is so important to honor that history. They have not just come and their life begins with you. No, they have a life. They've lived in utero of another woman. They were raised by whether their own family members or foster family members. And we have to acknowledge and honor that experience. So yes, it tweaks that in that sense. And that's another area that we will definitely dive into more. But the basic answer is yes, it will have an influence, and that it can be done in a positive way, in a strengths-based way. So that's important to be aware of.
Thank you, Judith. I mean, that's really very comprehensive, because you've had a breadth of experiences of mothering, range of mothers. You've got your stepchild, you've got another adopted child, you've got a birth child. I didn't have that range. I only never had a birth child, and I had 2 children to start with. Now, the interesting thing with my children was when I met them the first time, they both couldn't stand me at all. They could not stand me. They wouldn't come anywhere near me. They'd stand at a distance and look at me as if they knew something about me that I didn't know about myself. And I thought, oh dear. I remember I was telling my daughter this thing the other day. She said, Mommy, so why did you go ahead and adopt us then if we couldn't stand you? And I said, you know what? I realized the shifting reasons why you end up adopting a child. You start with one reason, and along the journey it changes. And we'll go into that another day, because I'll divert, and I don't want to divert right now. It deviates from the point that I want to make. And the point is that at the point that I decided I was going to go with them, whether they loved me, cared about me or not, was because I realized that the children needed to be protected. And I could not bear the fact that we would leave them where they were when we knew that they were being harmed. And so I decided I'd go ahead and do it. And you know what is so incredible? When you have a starting point like this where the children don't like you, you're not even sure whether you like them. You don't know whether it's going to, you don't even know whether you're ever going to be able to love these children, because I really couldn't work out whether it's going to. And literally every day was a new day. And I thought maybe today is the day when I'm going to send them back to social services. But it never happened until one day the children were playing outside on their bicycle and they were always fighting with each other. He loved flowers, so he's standing by the flower bed and examining this beautiful fuchsia plant and enjoying it. Then his sister jumped off her tricycle, jumped onto his tricycle and started riding off. And he'd ride close to her feet annoyingly. So he turned around and asked her to get off his tricycle. And she said no. And then he asked her gently. She said no, started crying, hollering, and she wouldn't get off his tricycle. So I saw them and I thought, you know what, this time I'm not even going to get involved. Let them sort this thing out themselves. And after she'd really provoked him quite a bit, she just jumped off the tricycle suddenly, got onto hers and started riding off. So he rushed onto his tricycle to get onto before she changed her mind. And as soon as he got onto it, he turned around to her. And that's even before the last tear dropped. He said, Arata, do you want to join me on my tricycle so we can ride it together? I thought, oh my, that just melted my heart. And I have to tell you, that was the day that these children gave me the hook that I could hang my cloak of love on. Because for the first time, I saw something that was so loving and so forgiving and so beautiful in them. And that was the day when it started growing. We've now got to a place where I forget that I didn't give birth to these children, and they actually forget that I'm not their birth mother. And that's an extraordinary thing. And because I've never had a birth child before, it's all I know. That's a beautiful thing. It's all I know. There are moments, though, with the parenting that I'm conscious that there is a nature versus nurture struggle. And that is when I'm reminded that it's because we do not come from the same lineage or the same life experiences. Indeed, character-wise as well, character is also passed down through the DNA. And these are little moments that happen. But in the main, they're the children that I have. And I don't know that I could love them any more or any less if they had been my birth children.
Thank you, Auntie. That's
What is a foundling? Somebody's asking exactly what a foundling is. Judith, I think you need to take that before we bring the program to a close.
Certainly. Thank you. So again, as I just was mentioning, you will learn and hear lots of new words, and it is really important. So I'm really glad this person asked this question. So I apologize. I should have broken that down earlier. So essentially a foundling is my experience. So I am what is considered a foundling adoptee, in so much that I had no information. I was found, for myself, it was on the roadside in a ditch. Often foundlings are placed in front of hospitals, police stations, fire stations. You hear sometimes a baby was found in a dumpster, behind a store, at a restaurant. Often foundlings are found really anywhere, but it just means a child who was found without identification, so that the original family cannot be contacted, and therefore the child then is often in need of adoptive or permanency family to take them forward for the remainder of their life. So that is essentially what a foundling is. It is not anything new. There's actually a foundling museum in the United Kingdom, and it talks a lot about the history of foundlings. It is not a new feature, and it happens right across the world. Often people think, oh, that only happens in what some people will refer to as developing countries, and it's simply not true. It happens in European countries and North American countries, and you often will hear stories on the news of a child was wrapped and found in one of these situations, as I've mentioned, and therefore the child then, as I say, goes often into the care system. And of course, around the world, care systems look different. So it may be a foster care home, it may be an orphanage. So there are different care facilities for children who are in need of that kind of care. So thank you so much for asking that question. We look forward to continuing to break down all sorts of questions for folks. Please, if you have any questions following the program that we haven't been able to get to today, please drop us an email. You'll see our handle here is Adoption Dialog without the UE. So it's Adoption Dialog, spelled DIALOG. You can email us at adoptiondialogue@gmail.com, and you can also find us on all platforms of social media: Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. We're even on TikTok, Snapchat, and we also have a YouTube channel. So we look forward to sharing with you throughout the weeks until we meet again. And if you're interested in sharing with us about your own experiences, please, you can also find us on Facebook at Adoption Dialogue. Again, dialogue is spelled Dialog. We look forward to being with you again next month. Thank you so much, all who have tuned in this month, and we look forward to seeing you soon. Thanks so much, Auntie Sally. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you, Judith. It's been a pleasure. And I just want to remind all of you, this is a monthly show, so look out for us. You'll know the dates we're going to put it out there, so you'll know when it is, and you can tune in and just be part of this journey with us. We are going to be a family. We want you walking alongside us in this beautiful family that we're establishing around the world. Thank you. Thank you, Judith.
Thank you for those that could stay to the end of this. I know that there's a question from Ms. D. Banks. So the question here reads, where is it? Yes. Is it important as the child becomes older to try to find out about any health history, and or how is that handled? And I'm aware it may be different in Canada to the UK and America, so that might be a difference to discuss as well.
The good thing about England is because most of the children who come into care system are coming through a structured system here in England, one of the most important things that social workers do is they actually take pains. There's documentation about the child who's coming. Even if the child's a foundling, they usually eventually find the parent. Well, not all cases, but in most cases, they're able to find the parent. And so we were able to get into the medical records, and we have a medical history for the child. And the beautiful thing is the medical history is so important that that carries through with the child into their foster care placement and goes on into their adoptive placement. And I think that in my case, when our we were given the medical care system, the medical documents, we went to register them in the hospital to let them know that to move their medical history over to the new hospital, and it turned out that the hospital already had it because that was where they were born, coincidentally. So yes, it follows them. So in England you have that, but then you have certain cases that the problem about it is that when they are foundlings or you have no links with their parents, then you don't have the history that came before them. And that's where the challenge is, because you wouldn't know whether there's diabetes in the family or high blood pressure or that sort of thing. Yeah. So Judith, do you want to take it over from here?
Yeah, in North America, it's very similar in terms of gathering information. So all information is gathered as much as possible at the information gathering stage, and so that's really important. 100%. It's important to get as much information as possible. It's also changed quite a bit with inter-country adoption as well. They do try and get as much information as possible about the family. The other little point that also is significant now is with DNA genetic testing. As an adopted person who's a foundling, for me and many others like me, that was opened a whole new door for us. So I grew up for most of my life, 38 years, with no information whatsoever. What part of the continent we are from, what's my ethnic makeup, any of that information. And fortunately, I now have more of that information, and it started because of DNA genetic testing. So in 2017, when it was now possible for a person to send in their own DNA, you didn't need a family member to get information. I, of course, jumped at the opportunity. I sent my DNA in, and finally, I was able to start filling in some of my blanks. So that was actually an incredibly profound moment. This is before I came into any reunion with any familial members. It was actually that medical information as well as regional information, and finding out, I'm Nigerian, I'm Ghanaian, I'm from Benin and Togo. That was beautiful for me. It was something finally to have. So yeah, gathering as much information is incredibly important. 100%. It's your child, right? It makes up that person. It's all of the things that come in to make all of us up. Pardon me. So it is really important.
That's a very important question to ask, actually. Thank you, Dee.
We have one more quick fire one from Elijah Adongo asking, what age is adoption not possible? And I don't know whether you mean for the child or do you mean for the person adopting? Do you know? So
I'll answer it from both ends.
yeah.
For child here in England, the children that are adopted tend to be children who are adopted after the age of 5. After 5 or 6, after 6, they're a little bit old and therefore they tend not to be adopted. But there are certain adoptive parents who would come in and say, I don't mind. I'll have them as an older child. And if they want to do so, they are allowed to do it.
I mean,
When
you're
it
speaking from preference, right? It's not abnormal illegally. It's just people preferences to adopt a smaller child.
Yes, yes, there's an element of that, but I think also the social services tend to go with that because they find that most people tend not to adopt children who are over the age of 5 or 6.
Mm.
That's what it is. So they kind of leave it there. But if people come in, they want to adopt a child who's older, they wouldn't stop them. That's the only thing is that the child is formed in their older ways, and therefore having to make them change and adapt to a new situation may be a bit more challenging for both the parent and the child, but it can be worked out. And then, if the other question that Elijah wants to know, in terms of parents, how old can you be before you cannot adopt? I think there is really no age limit from 2021, I guess, up to maybe 55. What would you think, Judith?
There's actually, yeah, actually a person can't be, at least here in North America, you can't actually be discriminated against for anything in terms of wanting to be an adoptive parent, and that does include age. Of course, everybody's health and well-being, mental health well-being, physical health well-being is taken into consideration when they're adopting. So you have to present like a clearance from your doctor, for example, but you actually, it's open-ended in that regard. In regard to the age of the children, it's really important for people to actually learn a little bit more about that. Is that older child adoption is something that is very much needed, and we are seeing older children being adopted here in Canada now. There's been a massive shift in the last couple of years, and we are seeing majority of children who are being adopted are actually over the age of 6, between 6 and 15. And there's even older children than that who are in need of families, right? So 15 to 18. And then even above that age, we're also seeing what we call like later in life adoption, right? There's such a thing as adult adoption as well. Because unfortunately, like you're saying, Auntie Sally, because so many families look at adoption as thinking of a baby, a toddler, and the reality is that children, of course, we all grow up, and there are children who have been in the care system for some time that were not adopted, and they are still waiting for a permanency family. So it's really important that those children are also considered, because I tell you, I have been involved in some older children adoptions, and it can be a very, very special circumstance, and yes, of course, there are different layers that you're then dealing with. I always think parenting is one layer. It's hard, it's challenging. When you are parenting through other means such as adoption, it adds layer, and each layer gets added and added as there are different complexities within the situation. So myself being a transracial adopted person, that's another layer, right? Auntie Sally and Arata, they have a transcultural adoption. That's another layer, right? So all of these different nuances play into adoption, and just as age does. So age is something for parents to sort of start to break free, I would suggest, of that mold of how they've thought. Yes, because there's older children who are in need of families as well. And the goal really is to find families for those children who are in need of them. So hopefully we'll definitely be diving into this topic more in another episode, older child adoption, and to help dispel some of the myths and fears that come along with it, for sure.
I remember meeting a 70-year-old. I was doing an interview, and when I came out, he said to me, "Oh, I'd love you to adopt me." And I actually thought it was a joke, but and he was older than me, but it turned out that he was actually very serious. And then later on, I met a couple of others who wanted me to adopt them as well. But then I didn't realize that it's actually a thing. There's an
Mm.
organization of people who are never adopted, who are in the care system, who are now adults, some of them, as I said, 70-year-olds, and they want to have a family. They want to be adopted. So we're going to find some of those people and bring them onto the show. I'm as curious about them as I'm sure all of you are, to have an understanding of what is what is it about. Help us to understand it, and what can parenting, adoption bring to them at this age? What is the need that they need to have filled that an adoption person, a parent can bring to them? So that's another thing we'll be exploring at some point, because even I'm very curious to find out about it. Yeah.
Thank you for that. We've got one question from Babwa. Thank you for joining.
Thank you.
Auntie Sally, were there any available resources for adoptive parents when you adopted, or did you learn as time went on? I think there's an element of both in there, but you
Yeah.
answer that.
To be honest with you, they tell you that they have all the resources. But you know what? I really think it's impossible to have the resources. And the reason that it's impossible to have the resources is because, as Judith keeps saying, it's layered. And every adoption is different. And every adoption has its own complexities. So, how can a system cater for such a breadth of complexities? It's not possible. And I think what happens is that you will be given general support, but a lot of it you're going to have to work through yourself. One thing, however, that helped me a lot actually is discovering an adoption support group. It was a group of other adopters. That was the best thing that I could ever, social workers know so much, everybody knows so much, but these are the people who are walking the journey. They're going through every single experience that you're likely to go through and more. And I heard stories from some of them that were really amazing. Some of them were horrendous, some of them were so incredible. But it was wonderful to hear all those stories because when I adopted my children, guess what? I experienced all of them. And it was so
Oh,
good that I'd already heard it before. And because I'd heard it before, I knew people had gone through it and had come out at the other end still on their feet. When it came my turn to go through it, it didn't scare me. I was able to deal with it, challenging albeit, but still, I managed to ride the tide. And thanks to that experience. And so I really, really, really recommend that if people get adopted, they should find adoption support groups that they can join. In fact, we're hoping that through this program, as time goes on, we will create an adoption support group as part of Adoption Dialogue to give them a place where they can meet up, albeit online, and share their experiences and support each other through that. Because that was one of the most important things for me. Thank you, Baba, for asking that question. I hope I've answered it. Judith, do you have anything to say to it?
Yes, I'm going to say I just echo what you're saying in terms of groups and staying connected to the community, both for yourselves as adoptive parents and especially for your children, right? Adoption, you know, it should be a normalized experience. And that's such a funny word. What is normal? But in terms of seeing yourself reflected, it's so, so important, to know I have other adopted friends and having spaces to also be able to about it. There's groups also for adopted young people, adults. I lead a group for adult adopted people who there's just a great understanding, and there's so much healing work that can happen and be done. And I would also encourage parents to always keep learning and educating. There's loads of, podcasts and webinars and books and articles, and I encourage folks to keep on learning because it's lifelong. This journey does not end, and therefore as things change and manifest and you see different experiences in your child, it's really important to stay on top of that as much as you can, and through continuing your own education. So I just echo that as well.
okay.
I
It
hope
looks
that
like
answers your question. Yeah.
we've come to the end of the questions. How would you both like to close this session?
Um, I'd like to start and say thank you for everybody who took the time out of their evening to come and join us at the launch of our Adoption Dialogue. We're going to make it a monthly show. In between, we're going to divide into small sections covering different portions of it. So you can go and look at it on YouTube. We'll send you the link so you can watch different parts of it. If there are certain parts that connect with you more or resonate with you more, you can go and listen to it more. One of the other things we're going to do is, as I said, it's monthly. um you've got our email address, which is adoptiondialogue@gmail.com. So send us information, send us your email address so we can have you on a list. We're going to send you all the information about when we have our meetings. They're going to be monthly. So thank you very much for taking the time out to be here with us, and I hope that you enjoyed it. Send us comments about this program. Tell us what you liked about
And
it, what you
feedback.
didn't like about it, feedback, and what you think we could do to improve it.
Yes, 100%. We really want to thank everybody for being here, and thank you for taking time to share your time with us. We really value your time. I would just also suggest if anybody would like to actually be interviewed, if you're an adopted person yourself, adoptive parent, or a professional in the field, please do contact us. Again, we'll put our email address in the chat box. It's adoptiondialogue noue@gmail.com. We would love to hear from you. As Auntie said, we welcome your comments and feedback. And really our goal is to cover the topics that folks find most interesting and informative. So we would welcome you to please do send that in for us. If you need any support whatsoever, if you're an adopted person or you're an adoptive family, please, or a biological family. That's also very important. We haven't touched much on that today, but we will definitely in future. Anybody in the adoption community, if you need support, please do reach out as well, and we can signpost you onwards. So that's a really important part of this process and this journey. So thank you once again. We wish you all a pleasant evening, and we certainly hope you will next week. We're actually launching our second and then third episodes. It is Adoption Awareness Month here in North America. So we would love it for you to join us next Sunday, November the 20th, same time, 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 7:30 p.m. GMT time, as we present the second episode of Adoption Dialogue, Fatherhood, with Paul Sinclair. So we believe that it will be another wonderful episode, and we look forward to seeing you next week, Sunday, November the 20th.
You're going to enjoy it because it's Paul. Paul is also a young man who was adopted. It's so interesting to hear it from a man's perspective. It's fascinating, his thought processes, what he went through, how he dealt with challenges. I found it so interesting listening to him. And I just want to let you know that the link that you used for coming into this show today is exactly the same link that will get you into the one next week on the 20th, next week, Sunday, 7:30 at the same time. In between then, please reach out to us. Our adoption dialogue at gmail.com email address is on the chat. Please copy it. Send us your feedback, please, so that we can make this a program that you will benefit from. Let us know what you want to hear. Let us, if you come across anything to adoption that you feel will be an interesting topic for us, let us know. We will research it, we'll bring it and talk about it. Thank you all very much for coming. And I want to say thank you to Arata. We only dragged her in yesterday and she delivered the show. Thank you, Arata, for launching Adoption Dialogue for us. Thank you so much.
No worries. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you very much for showing up. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
And thank you,
Bye.
Judith. Thank you. And thank you, Francis, in the background, who's our technical person, who saved the day when I was having a struggle. So thank you, Francis. Thank you. And thank you all for your patience. Thank you. Have a good night. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
To all adopted people around the world, I dedicate the song Desiderata by Les Crane.
And remember what peace
It's a powerful, life-changing poem for hard times, which inspires hope for all who hear it. My message to all adoptees is summed up in the chorus. You are a child of the universe. No less than the trees and stars, you have a right to be here. And whether or not it's clear to you, no doubt, the universe is unfolding as it should, and you have a unique and very important part to play in it. So stay strong, positive and focused, and you will thrive. I want to thank you all for joining us at Adoption Dialogue. If you have any questions or comments, send it to us at adoptiondialogue@gmail.com or drop it in the comments section of our social media platforms with the handle Adoption Dialogue without the UE at the end of dialogue. Thank you again. Stay tuned for our next episode on social media. Bye for now and stay blessed.